So it is the start of day 3. We just got up and the sun has not yet hit the valley. Got tons of ice last night all over the tent. Probably like, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch of ice on my tripod outside. So before we go out and shoot, we gotta dry everything out in the sun. But right now, just making some coffee, the jet boil, and then watching the river go by.
My name is Dave Morrow. 9 months of each year, I live in the wild, surrounding me in all directions, thousands of miles of pure wilderness. No roads, no people, no internet, no photography hotspots or social media likes, no top 10 tips to help you out. These things don't matter here. They never did and never will. I come here to challenge my fears and improve my craft, landscape photography. My backpack is filled with 2 weeks of food, camera gear and tripod, a shelter, a topo map and compass, and a GoPro to document the experience. I travel by foot. This is all I need. This series teaches my entire image creation process, the constant struggle to learn and improve, the drive to solve problems and create better photographs. My goal is to teach you what I know and the path used to get there. I challenge you to abandon the herd, leave the hive, think for yourself, stop chasing internet fame, followers, and likes. Blaze a new trail, create new ideas, teach others your path, devote every second to your craft. So thanks for watching, and welcome to the Wilderness Photography Expeditions.
Really good side light. So I've been walking around for a few minutes and I finally found a composition that I really like. So what I have is zoomed in right in this region, and the sun is right back through those trees. You can kind of see it poking through right here. So it's providing really nice diffuse side light, which provides nice depth to all these trees. And there's almost a little bit of fog or mist still rolling through this area, so quite nice for shooting. You can see how there's light on these trees, so they're not completely dead, but it almost gives it a really molded or depth look to the entire image. If it was just no light on it, like this back in here, you can't really see foreground to background. Compared to this, you can see all these little lines where the light hits off the trees. Lots of fog rolling into the forest back there. But in this video, I was going to discuss why I like to shoot aperture priority mode for all landscapes that have enough light for the camera to meter.
So in the first part of this video, I'm going to show you the in-the-field camera technique and the benefits of shooting aperture priority mode over manual mode. In the second part of this video, we are going to dive into these example images, and I will explain to you how I shot them and how I would have failed for shooting them if I would have shot in manual mode instead of aperture priority. So aperture priority is great for landscape and outdoor photography. At the end of this video, I'll also be discussing a brand new landscape photography course that I'm putting out. It's a video course that follows me through the entire image creation process. So first you'll follow me out on a 6-day backpacking trip into the mountains. And during that time, you'll follow me through 5 specific shoots where I'll walk you through the entire shoot step by step with camera technique, composition, and everything else I do to create images. And here's one of the images that I shoot in that course. There are many others. So along with that, after I get home from the trip, and this is included in the course as well, I will be reviewing all the images I took on the trip, discussing the ones I like, the ones I don't like, the composition techniques behind them, and the different camera and shooting techniques that made some better than others. Then I will select my favorites, and from there I will post-process them from start to finish. And you'll learn luminosity mask, you'll learn camera raw, you'll learn Photoshop, and everything else I use to post-process images. And here are 2 more examples of images that we will process in the course. And then if you'd like to get an add-on to that course, you can also learn how to process this image, and about 6 others as well. So I will explain that more at the end of this video, but I wanted to say thank you guys for being here and thank you for supporting all my free videos. I don't use ads on YouTube. I don't use ads on my website. And my theory for this is twofold. First of all, I don't want to spend my time learning how to get more clicks on videos because it's not really in line with me getting better at photography or me teaching you what I know about photography. Instead, I would rather fund and support my entire process of my website and the entire process of putting out free videos year-round by selling video courses that are actually in line with your photography goals. So instead of advertising, instead of worrying about all these views and subscribers and clicks and always shoving new gear and shoving ads down your throat, I would rather create courses. And if you want to help support me and what I'm doing and all the year-round free videos I put out, all the year-round free written guides on my website, purchasing a course is a great way to do that. And you can find the link for this course in the description. I will also talk more about the course at the end of this video. So let's dive back into the shooting part. Thanks for being here, guys.
Aperture priority mode and manual mode both allow the same amount of control. Manual mode just requires one more input than aperture priority mode, often causing much more work in your final shooting technique. So I'm going to display why I like to use aperture priority for shooting all landscapes where there's enough light for the camera to meter the scene. Now, manual mode's great for at night when your camera can't actually meter the scene and you need to dial in the f-stop, ISO, and shutter speed all manually. So I'm going to turn on my camera here and I'm going to go through why I prefer aperture priority. So I'll just start at baseline, random settings. First thing I always do first is focus. So I'm going to focus at the approximate hyperfocal point, which is right in here. And I will link my hyperfocal video and tutorial for you guys so you can learn that. Zoom in at 100%. Use that back button autofocus. And that looks good. Now I have a focal point right here. So I use what's called center weighted average metering. That means the camera reads the average amount of light in the direct center of my composition. I prefer to use that because it gives more consistency while your camera continues to meter this light. There's other settings called spot metering, which means you pick a spot in your composition that you want the camera to meter from. I don't find that spot metering works well for landscape photography. There's also another metering mode called evaluative metering or matrix metering, depending on your camera. Basically, that takes the camera and allows it to guess where to meter from in the scene. So there's no consistency when the camera might guess for one exposure that it should meter up here, but another that it should meter down there. So by using center weighted average, which just meters the center of the composition, I can get a much more accurate and much more repetitive metering control over the actual scene. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I just need to select a few different values. The first value I select is f-stop. The second value I select is ISO. And the last value I select is the actual exposure or image brightness. Aperture priority mode will automatically select the shutter speed for me. So I'm going to show you the benefits of that here in a moment. So first I will just select f8 to expose for this scene. And automatically, aperture priority mode is going to meter the amount of light coming in. It's going to say I'm shooting at f8, and then I'm going to select base ISO or 64 using this button. So now that I have ISO 64, the camera kind of sets a datum point or a baseline amount of light that's coming in from this scene as it was metered. So it's going to set this at this little 0 tick mark, and that's called zero exposure compensation. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to cycle through here and I'm going to pull up my RGB histogram. So what I want to do next is I can just grab this exposure compensation button, and normally it has a little plus minus on top of it. Mine's worn off. But all this is going to do, if I move exposure compensation darker, this bar will drop, and each of these large tick marks is one stop of light. Each of the smaller tick marks is 1/3 of a stop. So you'll notice as my exposure compensation drops, the histogram shifts to the left and the image gets darker. If I go up in exposure compensation, the image gets brighter and the histogram shifts to the right. What you'll also notice as I move this exposure compensation around is the shutter speed automatically moves for me. So a lot of people are going to say, well, I need to control my shutter speed. How can I do it using exposure compensation? Well, here's my answer to that, and here's why I really prefer to use aperture priority mode, at least one of the first reasons. If you think about 95% of your shots, you don't actually care what the shutter speed is. You definitely care what the f-stop is because you need to ensure depth of field from the foreground to the background. You definitely care what the histogram looks like because you need to have the right exposure for the scene. So by shooting aperture priority, you set base ISO or whatever ISO you'd like to start with. I always use base or 100. You select the f-stop, and then last you set the actual exposure using exposure compensation. Now by setting that actual exposure with exposure compensation, aperture priority mode is going to change the shutter speed to ensure that same exposure is met until you change it. So what will happen is if more or less light starts to filter into this scene, instead of the image getting brighter or darker like it would manual mode, aperture priority mode will automatically increase this if there's less light filtering into the scene. It'll automatically decrease the shutter speed, making it shorter if more light comes into the scene. It will hold the exact same histogram because you have set the exposure. So like I was saying, for 95% of shots, you don't really care about what the shutter speed is. The only time you would care about shutter speed is for shooting water or for shooting fast-moving objects that you need to freeze in place. But for a standard landscape scene like I'm shooting here, you don't need to worry about the shutter speed at all. You're always going to have to worry about the f-stop and the exposure or the image brightness, so it's key to weight those before shutter speed. And you'll always have the ideal image brightness even if the light filters through the scene differently, because the camera is metering that amount of light and automatically adjusting your shutter speed to what you need it to be. So that's a lot to take in one time seeing it. So we can go through a whole example here, and I'll go through my shooting process from start to finish, and you can see this in action. So the first thing I always do is I ensure that my composition's dialed in and level. The next thing I'm going to do is verify that I am at base ISO, or 100 works fine too. After I do that, I'm going to select my f-stop. Now by selecting my f-stop, I'm ensuring that I have sharp focus from the foreground all the way to the background. And f8 will work just fine for this scene. The last thing I'm going to do is come in here and I'm going to use exposure compensation right here to set my exposure for this scene. If I lower the exposure compensation, the image gets darker. If I increase the exposure compensation, the image gets brighter. I don't necessarily care what the actual exposure compensation value is. I just want to expose to the right for this scene, ensuring the brightest pixels in the image are touching pure white. So I will just increase or decrease the exposure compensation until they are touched up against the edge there. Now this is an RGB histogram for a JPEG file, so I can clip just a little bit of the highlights, and I know I can recover it in post. Just ensure that you're not clipping too much of them. So that's why I always like to back it all the way down so I can see the brightest pixels up here, and then I will slowly increase the image brightness so the brightest pixels are touching pure white but not exceeding it. Aperture priority mode automatically selected a 1 second shutter speed there. Even as the light changes in this scene, it's not going to matter. I don't have to readjust my shutter speed because aperture priority mode is automatically going to adjust it for me to maintain this exposure that I determined was optimal for this scene. So when I'm looking at this, if I wanted to adjust my shutter speed, which I don't 95% of the time, but if it's the 5% case where I do, I can just grab my ISO button. I can decrease ISO. I can increase ISO. Let's say I increased ISO really high to like 640. I don't really like to go beyond ISO 500 for this camera. And let's say my shutter speed still wasn't fast enough. The only other thing I can do here is either open my f-stop. If I do that, I'm not going to get the depth of field I want. So the last remaining choice here in the decision tree would be to decrease exposure compensation, which would make the image darker, and make the shutter speed faster. Now, I don't need a faster or slower shutter speed, so that's okay. But that's kind of just the decision tree I would use for this particular shot. So that looks good. 1.6 seconds is just fine for this scene. So I can fire that shot off. Now, to understand any of this stuff, it's going to be key that you understand how the exposure triangle works, how f-stop, ISO, and actual shutter speed work, and how exposure works. So when you're looking at anything like this, understanding the actual background science is going to be key. If you don't understand that, you can't really visualize what's going on, and none of this will make sense. So I have some really good long-form written guides that will walk you through the step-by-step process for all this stuff, and I'll link them below the video. They also have free PDFs that you can download and take out shooting with you. And by doing that, you'll be able to kind of study these off your smartphone while you're out in the field and say step by step, what should I be doing next, and does it make sense?
So now I'm going to discuss a few images that I took out in the field, and these are completed images, but I want to talk you guys through my thought process of why aperture priority mode performs much better than manual mode for shooting landscapes. And this applies to any landscapes that have enough light for the camera to meter the scene. If there isn't enough light, you'll need to use manual mode. And you guys can check out my star photography guides for that stuff, and I'll link them below the video. But let's first look at this image right here. So I will pull up the settings for this image. I shot this on a D810, a Nikkor 28-300 millimeter, and I shot it at 35 millimeters. And you can see my exposure settings here were 3 seconds, f11, ISO 100, center weighted average metering. So if we look at this shot, I'll pull it up full size. This is a shot where everything is static except the light on the landscape, meaning there's no movement in the foreground down here, the mountain's in place. The only thing that's moving is the light. So I don't really care about my shutter speed. All I did for this shot was I set my exposure using the expose to the right technique, exposing for the highlights in this scene. And then as this light changed over probably 20 or 30 minutes, it started pretty calm and then it got really vivid, as you see here. I took shots over that entire time as the light was changing. So I dialed in the composition I wanted, and then I just waited. And I took one shot, and then I'd wait 5 minutes, take another shot, wait 5 minutes, take another shot. And that allowed me to ensure that I could get the best possible light for the image by just sitting there. Now, if I were to shoot in manual mode, as the light changed in this specific scene, meaning it got brighter and brighter, or the sky got more vivid, or it touched on some of these glaciers, or stopped touching on them, I would have had to constantly adjust my shutter speed in manual mode to maintain the same exposure in the scene. So I would have all these potentially different images, some darker and some lighter, if I didn't adjust the shutter speed perfectly. Now that's the downside of using manual mode for this scene. By shooting in aperture priority mode, I just set the actual exposure I wanted, exposed to the right for this scene, and as the light changed, my camera metered this scene and adjusted the shutter speed for me. So when I got back from this trip, all of my images from this composition with all these different lightness values throughout and all these different looks for the sky were all of the same exact brightness, and I knew that brightness was perfectly exposed for the scene because the camera simply metered the scene, and from there it could determine what that exposure and shutter speed needed to be. So that's the benefit of it for this shot. So here is a different example image right here, and I'm going to pull up the settings for this one. You can see it's outlined in blue, and I'll pull it up full screen here in a moment. So shot on the D810 and 28-300 again at 90 millimeters. And let's talk about why I increased the ISO for this specific shot. So I set everything up. I exposed to the right for this specific scene, and this is the final image right here. So I exposed to the right in the field, and you can check out my exposed to the right video for that. But I noticed when I was exposing to the right that the shutter speed was too long, and I wasn't getting all this nice cloud detail. You can see how these clouds are really nicely defined here. And my shutter speed was so long that they were all kind of just averaging together. And in the field I was thinking, I really want to bring out the details and touches of light in these clouds. And if the shutter speed is too long, then I can't really do that. So what I did was I increased the ISO, maintained the same exposure, And by doing so and going from 64 or base ISO up to 250, it gave me a much shorter shutter speed. And by doing so, I could kind of get the result I wanted in the final image. So in this scene, everything wasn't static, and I was still able to use aperture priority mode. But the nice way that I went about this was, as the light changed in this scene, and I waited for the sun to get closer and closer to the horizon, this was at sunrise, the light was changing throughout the entire landscape, meaning the sky was getting brighter, the light on the clouds were getting brighter, but by setting the exposure compensation and aperture priority, the camera automatically adjusted things as need be, maintained the same image brightness, and when I would see that I needed a faster shutter speed to ensure this nice detail in the clouds, I would just adjust my ISO to get it. That ensured when I got back from the shoot, I could look at all these images. They were all perfectly exposed for the highlights, and they all had the image attributes, meaning the cloud detail that I wanted. I didn't have to worry about all these different images, such in manual mode, you'd probably have an image that was darker, an image that was lighter, one over here, one over there, some underexposed, some overexposed. So another benefit of shooting aperture priority, I got the outcome I wanted and I controlled the light in the way that I wanted. So I could probably go on for another hour with all the benefits of aperture priority mode over manual mode. And I always find what people tend to run into is that they were taught and they have been with manual mode for so long that they are so set on it being correct that they don't want to try something different. And even when I started out in photography, I questioned if it was right to use aperture priority or not, because I was thinking, all right, well, everybody uses or says you should use manual if you're an expert photographer, whatever that means. But I started testing everything and experimenting because I always like to question why I'm doing something in every step of the process and if it's actually helpful to me or not. And I realized that shooting aperture priority mode is much more efficient. It gives much better results for landscape scenes where there is enough light for the camera to meter the scene. Now, if the light isn't enough for the camera to meter, such as really early twilight, late twilight, or night sky stuff, you're going to have to use manual mode and dial in everything manually to get the right exposure. So I have tutorials on that and guides for night sky photography. I will link below. But before I let you guys go from this video, I wanted to give a quick overview of the new course that I'm putting out. And if you really want to learn in depth my entire shooting techniques and follow my entire image creation process, meaning follow me out in the field on 6 whole days of backpacking, looking for compositions in the mountain, discussing my thought process of how I look for images and light, and then once I set up those compositions, walking you step by step through the entire shooting process. Once I get home from the trip, I load up all the images and you can watch as I discuss all the different compositions, the ones I like, the ones I don't like, and then I will select my favorites to edit start to finish. So some of the images that are included in this new video series are this one, and this one. And this is the actual one that I captured out in the field, along with a few others that are included, which I'm not showing here. Now, if you'd like to learn more about my complete photo editing technique and the entire image creation process for photo editing, I have another add-on course that you can check out on the same page, which is linked. And it will describe the process of editing this photo and this photo, as well as 3 or 4 others, which I've added in there as well. And this explains my entire organization process for Lightroom and everything else that I use for the entire wide range of photo editing techniques. So you can get both of those in the link in the description. And as I had said before, guys, I sell courses because not only do I love getting better at photography, but I love teaching, and it really drives me. And something that's never turned me on or driven me in life is trying to advertise or trying to get people to buy things that they don't really need. And I think YouTube's a great platform. It's a great place to share, and I know that it thrives off of advertising, which I guess it wouldn't exist without it, but I have the chance to not be a part of that. And the fact that instead of worrying about clicks, instead of worrying about how many people see my videos, I would rather worry about the community and talking to people under my videos and taking advantage of all the people that currently exist and watch my videos and have good conversations with them. So instead of constantly trying to grow in ways of making my channel bigger or grow and getting more views and likes. I would rather talk to the people that are currently watching my videos and have good conversations with you guys and see what you want to learn and try to better my process in teaching and try to better myself along the same line. So to do that and to fund everything I create high-level courses because I think it'll truthfully help you to watch this course to improve your photography. I make these, I build the whole course, the whole way out from start to finish, and I can give you a look at what one of the insides of my courses look like right now. So when you sign up for any of my courses, this is my course module area. So instead of getting a bunch of downloads sent to your email that you have to keep track of, I have a way for you to either download all the videos or stream the videos. So here's the new course that I'm putting out, and if I click on this, you can see inside it you have all your different modules of learning. So these are the main overviews, the main sections. You can see that there's intro information, and then these are in the field shooting technique, camera skills. So if I clicked on one of these, just click on this one for example. This is one of the videos from in the field, and you have the option to download it, or you can just push play. My name is Dave Morrow. You can stream it. Now there's snow right here between this, and you can see more of that depth there in between. So it's kind of a way for you to learn if you'd like to stream it, or you can download all these videos to your phone, to your computer, or anywhere else you'd like to watch them. And you can see all the different modules over here are laid out. So it's almost like you're attending a class or a lecture, and you can come back. And the first time you log in, these will all say start next to them. So you can just start the lesson and go through them. So this latest course is pretty long. These are all the photo editing sections. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 start to finish photo edits. And they talk about luminosity mask, they talk about advanced, intermediate photo editing techniques and everything else. And these are pretty long videos. So this is an hour, this is 40 minutes, this is another hour. So you're gonna get a lot when you sign up for one of these. And just like all my courses, I don't really want to rip anybody off. My goal is you to learn and get the best experience. So if for any reason you don't like the course, just shoot me an email. I'll give you a full refund and you can keep the course. I don't really want any skin in the game of just getting quick dollars, quick money, and leaving. I'm all about building long-term community, long-term relationships around landscape and outdoor photography. So if you guys want to help support what I'm doing and all the free stuff I put out on a year-long basis, buying courses will help you to learn. And it'll also help you to support what I'm doing in the future so I can create more stuff. Now you're also able to get, as part of this link below the video, my photo editing for landscape and outdoor photography course. I put this on sale last year, but it's always around and you guys can get it when I put it on sale. So this goes through my entire workflow and organization for photo editing, screen calibration, and then it goes through all the basics of photo editing and it builds up to 5 start to finish photo editing videos where you'll learn intermediate expert skill levels as well. So this kind of plugs in to my other course and they go together. And if you guys want to learn more about all this and support what I'm doing, I'd really appreciate it. You can find the link below the video. So we've been out for the past 3 hours bushwhacking around through the woods looking for old growth groves to find some good compositions to shoot in. Found a few so far. Got a few shots that I think I might like. And then we were also up scouting upstream a little bit from where our camp is, trying to find a good spot that we can get the pack raft across tomorrow. So we're gonna cross the stream in a pack raft and then head back down and explore the other side on the way back to the vehicle over the next 3 or 4 days. But it looks like there's a weather system coming in. We just checked the satellites this morning and looks like it'll be hitting Wednesday night or Thursday morning. So we don't want to get trapped out here with the rivers flooding where we have no way to cross. Because the pack raft I brought is just a really small one, basically used for small river fords and just portaging packs across really heavy flow, but it will get ripped apart by serious whitewater, so keep an eye out for that. Coming into a nice clearing right now, really good light, some fog on the ground. Head over that way to shoot. So here's the kind of light that we've been searching for all day. Really good. The sun just pokes through those trees and makes light rays all over the place. Wow. Good stuff.
gonna get my camera set up and do some shooting here before the sun moves and these light rays stop. Can't wait to start shooting here. So I found a good composition over here where the light's poking through this tree. I've got it cropped in right in here. I'll show you the back of my screen. Like this. So I like how on this side there's this tree that's catching light right in here. It's kind of balancing the left-hand side. And those light rays direct the eyes back towards that silhouetted tree in the background right there. So in post-processing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave all these old growth trees almost completely dark in shadow. And then I'll highlight the light rays and those nice touches of light on the edge of this tree right in the foreground. So for this specific shot, pretty easy as far as settings go. I'm going to first just focus with my single point spot focus right in on this tree, center of attention. And that's the approximate hyperfocal. I use the back button to focus there. And you can see I'm focused on this high contrast line between the dark tree and the highlights there around the edge, right on that moss. And that allows the autofocus to work very easily. So hold down the back button. And then after that's got what it thinks is the optimal focus, I always grab my focal ring and I watch the back of the screen. I turn it back and forth slightly to ensure autofocus nailed it. So that looks good there. Next thing I want to do is look at the back of my screen, and I want to adjust my white balance, which is in Kelvin mode. And I want to ensure that that white balance is neutral, meaning the back of the camera screen looks like what I see with my eyes. And that'll give me the most accurate reading of the histogram, which I'll select here in the next steps. Gotta go with F11, ISO 64 for this, and then just use exposed to the right technique with aperture priority mode and exposure compensation. So I just want to push my histogram all the way to the right, touching the edge. And I can blow out a few of those pixels because this is a JPEG histogram. The RAW file has a lot more space on the highlight end and the dark end. So I want to push that as far right as possible without blowing out the highlights. But since the JPEG histogram is going to show that I'm blowing out the image a lot sooner than the actual RAW file, I can push it about a stop to a stop and a half beyond that edge, and it's still all good. So that's kind of my technique for shooting highlight scenes like this. Now the histogram looks good to me. I'm going to go ahead and fire that shot off. So the key, if you're going to expose to the right past the actual RGB histogram for the JPEG file, which you see on the back of your camera screen, is to test your camera at home and ensure your RAW file can handle that. So what I would do is I would first take a shot that's exposed at the highlights or at pure white for the JPEG file, then go one stop beyond that in exposure compensation, 2 stops beyond that in exposure compensation, and then 3 stops beyond that. Then you can test your files at home, looking at them in Camera Raw or Lightroom, and you can see which one pushed as far as possible without blowing out. So I'm going to look at the histogram here, and I can see that I'm a few areas along where the tree is, it's blown out. But I know that the actual RAW file won't be blown out there. That allows me to capture all this really nice dark detail in here and right behind the trees. So I just got done with that shoot. Headed through the woods back to camp. Try to collect some firewood and get a big raging fire going. It's been really cold these past few nights. Frost and everything, and it's getting below the dew point every night, so just wet, frosty, repeat.